Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a puzzle that's about to affect millions of drivers. You see, while most of the country is getting some relief at the pump, a perfect storm is brewing out west, one that could send gas prices through the roof.
It really is a tale of two very different trends. Across the U.S., the forecast is for gas prices to keep falling, which is great news for most of us. But if you're on the West Coast, well, the arrow's pointing in the complete opposite direction, with a serious risk of price shocks and maybe even supply shortages. So what in the world is causing this split? Why is one part of the country looking at such a different and, frankly, more expensive future at the pump? Let's dive in and unpack the unique challenges facing the West Coast. Okay, so the root of the problem really boils down to two things: geography and infrastructure. The West Coast is what the energy industry calls Pad 5, which, is just their technical term for a fuel distribution region. But what it really means is that it's basically a fuel island with very, very few pipelines connecting it to the big refining centers in the rest of the country. And that isolation, it makes the entire region incredibly vulnerable to any local problems. And right now, the biggest problem of all is happening at the very epicenter of this market: California. At the heart of it all are California's very ambitious environmental policies. They're pushing hard to accelerate a shift away from fossil fuels. And this really highlights that classic tug-of-war in the energy transition, right? The long-term green goals are creating some serious short-term volatility. With rules mandating zero-emission vehicles by 2035 and cracking down on in-state oil production, the writing's on the wall for refiners, and they're planning their exit. And let me be clear, this is not some far-off problem. It's happening now. Phillips 66 is already shutting down its Wilmington refinery, with a full closure set for late 2025. Then, just a few months later, by April 2026, Valero's Benicia refinery is going to idle its main units. Now, they do plan to keep importing fuel, which should soften the blow a bit, but it's still a major change. And the scale here is just huge. When you add these two closures together, the region is losing the capacity to produce nearly 300,000 barrels of fuel every single day. That is a massive hole to suddenly have in your supply chain. And this is where you really start to see the ripple effect, because this is such an interconnected market. A production cut this big in California doesn't just stay in California. Oh no, it sends shockwaves to all of its neighbors. Okay, so take Nevada, for example. The state is almost completely dependent on its neighbor for gas. I mean, a staggering 90% of its fuel comes from California. So any hiccup there is felt almost immediately in places like Vegas and Reno. And it's not just Nevada. Arizona is in a tough spot too. A full 1/3 of all the fuel in Arizona comes from California's refineries. The same ones that are now shrinking. For a state with a big and growing population, that is a major vulnerability. So, what does this all mean for your wallet? Well, the forecasts are pretty stark. Analysts are warning that for folks in states like Nevada and Arizona, you could see prices jump more than $1 above what everyone else in the country is paying. And for places like Oregon, they're facing the risk of huge price spikes right during peak summer demand, exactly when families want to hit the road. Okay, so just when you think it can't get any more complicated, it does. While the Southwest is dealing with a supply crunch, there's a totally different issue brewing up north that could make things even worse, especially for a state like Washington. And this new wrinkle? It's all about proposed tariffs, and we're talking big ones, 10 to 25% on Canadian crude oil. Now, this isn't about the finished gasoline, it's about the raw material that refineries need, and it's a direct threat to the Pacific Northwest's energy supply. And if you look at Washington state, you can see just how vulnerable their refineries are. We're talking up to half of all their crude oil coming straight across the border from Canada. And here's the kicker. It's not like they can just get this crude oil from anywhere. These specific refineries are built to process the heavy type of crude that Canada produces. As one report from RBC put it, for these Puget Sound refineries, those Canadian barrels are considered irreplaceable. So what happens if these tariffs actually go through? Well, for drivers, it could mean another huge price shock. The estimates suggest it could add anywhere from 50 cents to a full $1 per gallon at the pump up in the Pacific Northwest. So you've got this supply crunch coming up from the south, a potential trade threat looming from the north. It all begs the question, right? Is anything being done to try and stabilize this whole shaky situation? Well, there is one massive infrastructure project on the horizon called the Western Gateway Pipeline. The big idea here is to finally connect that fuel island on the West Coast to the huge refining centers in the Midwest. If this works, it could be a total game changer, giving the region a much-needed safety valve. But here's the catch. It's a massive, complex project, and it's not expected to be up and running until 2029.
And that really gets to the heart of the issue, doesn't it? It's become a race. On one side, you have these policies driving down supply in the here and now, and on the other, you have this giant infrastructure solution that's still years away. So which one is going to win? The answer to that is probably what will decide what you end up paying at the pump.
Now, if you want to dig even deeper on all this and follow the latest news, you've got to check out the excellent original reporting from the Shasta Beacon. It's fantastic stuff, and it's what we base this whole explainer on.